seed, one of the stronger players on the SCG Live Series. He's currently 10th, so in line for one of the Players' Championship slots. He was a top 8 competitor at Pro Tour Gatecrash in Montreal a few years ago. Steve Guillerm on his own side has somewhat of a resume himself. He has frequented the Pro Tour a couple of times. I actually have had the chance to play him at the previous Pro Tour in Honolulu. Remember, the next one is coming up in 2 weeks. Also a judge from the New England area.
I have recognized him as a judge at one of our events not that long ago.
All right, so breaking down the board, this is a Thought Seize from Steven Mann. He has, in the cards for Steve, he has Counterbalance, Entreat the Angels, among others. We'll see the rest of that in just a second. But either way, Steve's on the ropes a bit here. We see a 5/6 Tarmogoyf, a Deathrite Shaman attacking right now, and it looks like Steve is down some land drops at the moment. And we'll get life totals here for you. This is turn, maybe just, I believe actually it's just turn 3 here. So Steve will set up a counterbalance. That was his first damage. He's down to 14. But a bit behind on the board. He has a Jace of his own. Steven ready with a Spell Pierce.
And that's an intriguing dimension of this matchup as well. The first instinct for a lot of Miracles players is just get counterbalance on my deck. They have Abrupt Decay. But when you do that 100% of the time, the Sultai Delver player can just cut the Abrupt Decays because they know there's not really any targets in the deck. But if you know for sure that your Delver opponent is doing that, then you can just go ahead and keep your counterbalances in. A lot of play.
Yeah. I actually had a really interesting discussion with Jerry Thompson about this 2 years ago. Jerry was talking about counterbalance and about how a lot of players want counterbalance to be a hard counter in this matchup a lot of the time. But he says there's actually a lot of value in just having counterbalance maybe be a double counter spell, something that counters 1, 2, maybe 3 cards, and then it gets killed, then it misses, and that's actually fine. It's still creating you card advantage.
Yeah.
Post board, I would say in this matchup, it's more of that style card than a lock piece.
And it's actually not even the end of the world if this trades with an Abrupt Decay because, there's a lot of times the Miracle player's in a position where they have some lands and they entreat, but not for the full amount to play around Daze and Spell Pierce. And so you see these entreats for 2 or for 3, where an Abrupt Decay does provide some defense against the Angels that get generated.
Yeah, we're going to see a Ponder on from Steven Mann. That one does not get countered, so he's going to resolve it. Tarmogoyf will swing in. It's for 5 more. Guillerm is down to 9. And Tarmogoyf, just quite the clock here.
Though, again, all of this can get undone by Terminus on the top, and so Steven still has to be very careful.
Yeah, he doesn't want to commit too far into the board. You see he has a Wasteland, has a Spell Pierce, has another Deathrite Shaman, and he's wary to commit any of these to the board. Right now, you see he's deciding about that Deathrite, whether that's something he wants. It does shave a turn off of Guillerm's clock. Tarmogoyf swing can put Guillerm down to 4 next turn. It'll be 2 Deathrite activations. Steven can do one of them this turn, but by playing the second Tarmogoyf, it gives him some insurance against removal spells.
And another factor here is, let's say Steve does have a Terminus on top of his deck. Well, what's your Deathrite Shaman really worth on the way back, especially in the face of a counterbalance? So it may be worth just crossing your fingers and hoping it's not there, rather than leave the Deathrite Shaman in reserve, in quotes, when it doesn't really matter if that happens.
And speaking of Deathrite Shaman, that one's not going to work. Steve cracked a fetch land in hopes of blind countering the Deathrite, and it did work. Brainstorm was the card on top. But what that does mean is that Steve's not going to Miracle Terminus here.
Yeah.
We'll see what he can do. Remember, Mann actually has left up Spell Pierce in his hand. That's one of his 2 remaining cards. So with that said, Mann is in a pretty commanding spot here. You see he has actually 8 damage now on the table. The Deathrite Shaman made Tarmogoyf a 6/7, so that plus the Deathrite's black activated ability is enough to kill Steve on the next turn.
Yeah, there's still a risk that things can go awry. If Steve, for example, is able to find a land and a source of plowshares off of this Brainstorm, maybe claw back in, but Steven definitely in the driver's seat right now.
Yeah, maybe he can just find the swords and blind counter another card with that counterbalance. Maybe the Spell Pierce won't resolve. Steve has options, but he's going to have to hit some of these things.
And now.
And now.
It can't be later.
Yeah, we'll see what he does here. Looks like a pass from Steve. And Mann is deciding whether or not he wanted to end step to activate the death right. The answer was no. And now we go to upkeep, and on upkeep, Steve's going to go ahead and Swords to Plowshares the Tarmogoyf. Here comes Spell Pierce from Mann. Can Steve fight the counter war? No, he doesn't even check the counterbalance.
Well, he knows from the brainstorm if it's...
Oh, right, he knows whether it's there or not. It's
there.
not. Okay, you're absolutely right. So it's not a 1 on top. Mann gets the game, and we're going to go on to game 3.
And sometimes that can happen in this matchup. You know, the Miracles deck is not always the smoothest coming out of the gates. There's a lot of random, unwieldy pieces that you can draw that you're really hoping for brainstorms and divining tops to smooth out to really get the engine humming. But if you don't have a divining top, then you just draw, you're going to get hands of, you know, miracle cards in your opening hand, 3-mana removal spells. I mean, these are not, you know, efficient legacy cards.
Yeah, and even counterbalance, when you think about it, this is a 2-mana spell that doesn't affect the board. You know, it's great at countering the future spells, but you are spending a turn 2 to not do anything. So when your opponent is playing a 1-drop into 2-drop, you can get run over when piloting the Miracles deck. We do have some results from the other sides of the bracket. First of all, in our Dredge mirror, Juha Tolvanen, playing Manaless Dredge, was able to defeat Damon Whitby in 3. Have to be curious whether that was on the backs of games 2 and 3.
Well, a match that I'm sure will be treasured in the archives of Magic forever. Dredge versus Manaless Dredge.
I mean, there were 4 Ley Lines of the Void in Juha's board, and there is not removal for Ley Line in Damon's board. I have to think that if Juha just mulligans to one of these, oh gosh, I was going to say if he mulligans to a Ley Line, he has the game. Except if he mulligans, say, to 4 to find a Ley Line, then he spends his first 5 turns. This is gross.
It's still fine.
This is gross. I mean, yeah, it's still fine, but he might get beaten up by Stinkweed Imps. You never know.
And Jake Baldowski won 2-1-2, so those 4 Ley Lines in the board are going to come in very handy against his Reanimator opponent waiting for him in the semifinals.
Yeah, Jake Moldowski, 2-1, defeats Gerard Fabiano. Still is a top 8 finish for Gerard on a large number of points, but he's not going to get to hold up a trophy this weekend. And we'll see soon how that affects his standing in the Players' Championship. Not sure he's going to overtake Ross just on a top 8.
Still a good run, though. Steve is very well dressed. This is good to watch. A degree of professionalism at the table. Not that I should be the one to talk, because I'm often, you know, track-suited and backwards hatted up, but I can appreciate Steve's style here.
I usually wear a hat.
You made me break my commentary rule of never laugh at anyone else's jokes.
All right, Steve Guillerm is going to get to be on the play game 3 here, and always something pretty good against any Delver deck, whether it's Sultai Delver or traditional Delver here. But one thing I'm noticing about this matchup is that it doesn't seem as tempo-oriented as a lot of Delver matchups I see.
Absolutely. That's because, unlike other builds of Delver, Sultai Delver has the ability to play long, because it's not just, you know, it can play against the counter spells. It has hand disruption. It can play with the Vendilion clicks. It can break up counterbalance. You can play a longer game and hang around. Most Delver decks, it's just play the cards in my hand, hold up the defenses as long as I can, and hope that that's good enough. Sultai Delver can do that as well, but if the game shifts to phase 2, where we're kind of in the mid-game, the game's not over by any stretch.
And he even has 2 copies of Treasure Cruise in his deck. And that's something that I would think would really help the Sultai deck go late. I mean, try countering Treasure Cruise off of Counterbalance, for example. This is something I said I really wanted to see. You'd have to basically play your own Treasure Cruise, a Dig Through Time, a Tombstalker, and I actually couldn't come up with any other 8 CMC cards in Legacy that people play.
I'm sure there's some Reanimator targets, but...
Right, Gristlebrand.
Right.
He's 8, all right. You're absolutely right. In my Counterbalance Gristlebrand deck, I can get that Treasure Cruise.
Metagame madness already.
All right.
We're already shifting in the face of Khans of Tarkir.
Game 3 underway. Steve started out on Basic Island. Steven had a Deathrite Shaman, and Guillerm's just going to pass back the turn. 2 lands and go. This is a Scalding Tarn as his 2nd land.
I believe Steve showing off his judge status with some judge foil basics.
Indeed, I was going to say that's a nice full art land, and then I realized that's not one of the Zendikar full arts, though it looks like one.
No, it is the real deal.
Oh man, these are the kind of lands that I can't afford to play with. Anyway, Steven Mann is going to ponder here. He has that death right in play, so 3 mana available to him. Sees a pretty good bevy of options. Thoughtseize, Tarmogoyf, and another land on top. Can't imagine he'll shuffle it, and he doesn't.
Although he has been aggressive about his shuffles, which, again, I really like.
Yeah, that uncorrect Verdant Catacombs can let him reset if he decides he doesn't want any of those 3 cards. We'll see where he goes here. There are no fetches in the graveyard, so he may have to shuffle away one of those.
Or he can just say go. I mean, nothing's really happening here. He still has a daze to protect himself from some follow-up. So if he really wanted that Tarmogoyf, he could have taken it if he wanted to. He'd rather cast something this turn, but...
Yeah, I think time is, even though there's not a complete tempo matchup, Steven has decided that time is of the essence here. If he gets to crack a fetch land, that does mean that he has 3 mana available to him instead of 1 this turn, and that's a pretty big difference.
Yeah, no, but it is, the fact that it's even a decision point speaks to the staying power of Sultai in the matchup. You can afford to be a little bit choosier, not be the most tempo-oriented deck in the format, because you don't just lose if the Miracles deck is able to get 4 or 5 lands into play.
All right, and that is Underground Sea. He found a second one, so no green yet. He'll start with Thoughtseize. And Guillerm, I don't think wants any of that. It looks like he's going to pierce it. Or maybe not. He's going to Brainstorm in response. He could have cast traditional Counterspell on it, opted not to. Instead, he wants to hide his good cards.
Well, the Counterspell is rather a pretty valuable resource here for Steve, so.
And Mann is going to hold up this Brainstorm. He's going to Spell Pierce it off the Deathrite Shaman. And that means Thoughtseize is resolving. We'll see Guillerm's hand. It is Jace, Council's Judgment, Supreme Verdict, Arid Mesa, and Counterspell.
Really solid grip. I mean, spot removal, sweepers, and some power cards. Not easy to carve a hole in this hand. And you can see why Steve was so quick to try to Brainstorm here, because there's some goodies to hide.
I mean, it's got a definite game plan, right? 3 removal spells into Jace, along with some lands to cast them.
Yeah. I mean, the easiest thing to do, I say easiest, but it's not really that easy, is for Mann to just take the Jace and try to slog through this removal, but that's playing into Guillerm's hands to some extent.
Yeah, I was going to say, for a Delver deck, slogging through all the removal is not a particularly easy thing to do. There aren't that many threats in Sultai Delver. No, I don't know. I'm not sure how excited I'd be to get through Verdict, Council Judgment, and Counterspell. It may be instead that what Mann's going to do here is he's going to take a removal spell and hope to snag that Jace with the Daze that's in his hand.
Yeah, he can, for example, next turn try to click away the Supreme Verdict, play against the removal spells a little bit.
And on his turn, Guillerm plays another fetch land. He did draw his land 4, which could cast Jace. That was Volcanic Island. You see here he's playing fetch lands and cracking them. It looks like he's trying to protect himself from Wasteland. We'll see if he gets any duels. It looks like he's going to get one. He's going to get a basic island and a Tundra.
Well, I think he's trying to cast Council's Judgment. I do not believe he had 2 white fetches. I think he might have had a Tarn and a Mesa, so he has no choice but to get the Tundra.
Yeah, he's going to have to get that. That will open him up to the 1 Wasteland in Mann's hand. But it's going to be Council's Judgment. And what a game plan here for Mann. He has the Daze in hand, opted not to Daze there because it seems like he's holding out for Jace.
Yeah, and that's going to become a lot more attractive now that Steve has committed a non-basic land to the table, which means this Wasteland can go and take care of this Tundra.
Yeah, so he has the mana denial down. He's going to wait a turn. Wasteland isn't as good when you don't have a threat down. And I like how Mann's playing this once again. He's going to main phase Vendilion Click to get either the Verdict or the Jace. And he's going to put the Verdict on the bottom, not showing any respect for the Planeswalker.
Now Guillerm is in a really tough squeeze because he's facing down that Wasteland. So now he has a huge incentive to just tap out for the Jace because he might not have an opportunity to cast it down the line.
2 cards drawn there. One of them was off the Vendilion Click. The other one was for Guillerm's turn. So he's back up to 4. He has the 4th land. If you're Guillerm, you have to think that this Jace is not good. Steven didn't take it. And you do see Daze from Mann.
The thing is, you can see, on the other side of it, you can imagine Mann saying, well, the Vendilion Click makes your Jace awkward enough that I'm willing to let you have it. So it's not 100% there's a counter there, but the odds are good, and Steve had it.
I mean, you'd think so. Jace could unsummon the Vendilion Click that turn. There are a lot of plays that I don't think Mann would want to let Steve have that one. But you're right.
Well, compared to us, so it's not like the other card was garbage. It's a supreme verdict. So
That's true.
the fact that he's facing down the Wasteland, I think, is the tiebreaker. You may not be able to cast it next turn anyway, so.
It's going to be pretty hard to cast a Daze-proof Jace at any point here.
Exactly. So I think to some extent his hand was forced.
All right, a Ponder from Mann is going to help him reload after that Daze. He does have in play the Vendilion Click, so he has a clock, but he doesn't have too much backup. Remember, the Miracles deck top decks removal a fair amount of the time to get out of these situations.
Yeah. It is the nice thing about playing Miracles. The top of your deck can be very generous.
Vendilion Click will put Guillerm down to 15. Abrupt Decay and Brainstorm Mann's remaining 2 cards. He does not have any green sources in play right now. That fetch for Underground Sea earlier on in the game may come back to get him a little bit, depending on if he ever draws a green card.
Although for the time being, no big rush because the Abrupt Decay is not really needed.
Wasteland takes out the Volcanic Island, and we'll see what Guillerm can stick. He's got a bit of a green light here. He'll play Scalding Tarn, and you see Counterspell in his hand, along with one other. Can he answer the onboard click? It doesn't look like it just yet. Draw from Mann another Vendilion Click. So in the event that Steve gets rid of this one, he's going to have to face down a second click.
This is great backup here for Mann.
Yeah, he can play a third land and then sit behind click, backup click if he needs to. And he may debate the land drop. Ideally, rather than playing this Underground Sea, he would Brainstorm, find a fetch land, put this sea back, and then fetch for a green source.
Well, the other side of it is, who's to say Steven Mann needs to Brainstorm this turn?
He can just do nothing.
You can just say go.
Yeah, he's going to play the land and then say go, looks like. And there's a Swords to Plowshares on Mann's end step here from Guillerm.
And now Steven Mann getting really paid off for this because instead of committing any mana to this Brainstorm, he can just let the Swords to Plowshares resolve and use all 3 mana to click Guillerm once again.
Definitely true. Guillerm's last card is a Counterspell, just the proper card Counterspell. So when that happens, yeah, Mann's going to wait to the draw step and go for it. Guillerm draws, is going to Counterspell it. Now has 1 card in his hand that he's going to get to keep. We'll see what it is. I believe it may have been a Vendilion Click of his own.
2 clicks in the sideboard for Steven Guillerm, so.
And reasonable card to sideboard in here. You want to be sure that you can attack cards like Liliana if they show up. So typically a Miracles player will board in some number of Vendilion Clicks here. And because of the 2 mana cast on Counterspell, Guillerm can't make that play. He's just going to leave up 2 mana and pass back. This will go over to Mann, who's going to make a main phase Brainstorm here. He does not have any threats left, so he's going to have to find something pretty quick. And this is one of the more difficult spots you can get in with Delver, is that you are threat light at the end of the day.
Very much so.
But a great sequence here for Mann. He did find another land. It was a fetch land. He can get his last color, and he Brainstormed into Liliana of the Veil, a card that not only will resolve here, but will get the Vendilion Click that's in Steve's hand.
And really punish Guillerm's future reactive draws because he is now empty-handed.
Yeah, well, he'll have no hand. The Vendilion Click, that was supposed to be his answer to cards like Liliana. It's going to fall to the Liliana here if Mann goes for it. That will put Guillerm, a lot of pressure on Guillerm to find cards like a Council's Judgment, possibly, or, well, that's really about it, or maybe an Entreat the Angels to deal with Liliana.
Though he's going to be pretty resource light, most likely, so it's not even clear Entreat will be a full solution.
Yeah, not a full one. It's probably his best top deck at this point. A pair of 4/4s is pretty good against Liliana, but you're absolutely right here. This could be a problem.
Well, that is the best top deck for sure.
Sensei's Divining Top. It does help him find and Entreat the Angels, and on top of that, if he does pull out of this Liliana, it will help him even more after the fact.
Yeah.
You see him spinning top Jace the Mind Sculptor among the cards on top of his deck, and this Divining Top, by finding the Jace for him, has already earned its keep. The play for the turn from Mann was Deathrite Shaman. Steven's going to play Deathrite, then plus Liliana. And we're back to Guillerm.
It's funny, you know, Liliana the Veil is assumed to be so good against control decks, and generally speaking it is. But once the Miracles player has Divine Top in play, they can play very effectively empty-handed.
Yeah, it's pretty interesting. Top lets you play off the top of your deck and not playing with your hand. On top of that, Miracles, to a point, can ignore the Liliana. There's not one ability of the card that actually stops the Miracles' game plan.
The ultimate is an issue. Because
The ultimate's difficult,
it's
but
tough.
it'll destroy half of Steve's lands, sometimes a little more, which is certainly inconvenient, but not unbeatable. You can let Liliana ultimate against you and win the game nonetheless. Jace will be played, and he brainstorms, gets that extra card, and I like how he played this. He found a land on his brainstorm, kept that one, put the other two back, and played it so that he wouldn't have to discard anything to Liliana.
Good sequencing.
That land will be used to spin top. And this is one of the scary parts about Miracles. There's a lot of hand control going on by Mann, but it's not working against Steve. All his best cards aren't in his hand. They're the next card he's going to draw. And we'll see from Mann what he wants to do. He may have to start attacking the Mind Sculptor here.
Although that's also pretty rough because, Jace is so good at, protecting itself. And Guillerm's not that low on life, but it is conceivable that Steven Mann could start using Deathrite Shaman to deal some damage and pressure that way. But both things are not ideal.
Yeah, remember, Deathrite's activated ability is loss of life, so it can't be redirected to Jace. The only way Deathrite can hurt Jace is through the attack step.
And it's a tough slug. And Guillerm can also, probably pretty easily shut it down by just finding one piece of removal. But Steven Mann at least needs to force the issue to some extent.
On that last turn, Mann had the option of holding on to Spell Pierce. Instead, he plussed to get Liliana up to ultimate range. But Guillerm had set up the top of his deck to be Entreat the Angels. He's going to Miracle it for the full amount, which is 3. And now there's 12 power worth of flyers on Guillerm's side of the board. And this is where you just feel, Guillerm's ignored this Liliana and really not had to pay much of a price for it.
We'll see what the split is now, though. I'm interested to see that Guillerm decided to brainstorm there instead of Fate Sealing. Because it seems like you're way more concerned about a random draw at this point than finding one more land.
Yeah, because he has Divining Top, he doesn't necessarily have to keep brainstorming to get card advantage. Fate Sealing is pretty strong here. But assuming Steve loses all the Angels to the Liliana ultimate, or most of them, he does have to worry about being raced by Deathrite Shaman.
Yes, that's true. But Mann is in an awkward spot here because I don't even know if he can split Angels versus, because Guillerm can most likely just keep the 3 Angels.
At the very least, it would mean he'd get Jace and the lands. It would give some pause to Guillerm to sacrifice everything just for 3 creatures.
Even Mann's most aggressive split in an effort to get the Angels off the table may still fail.
An ultimate by Liliana. In response, Guillerm's going to spin the top off his basic mountain, and then the split will happen. What do you think it's going to be?
What do you think about Angel, Jace, Divining Top versus Angel lands?
So 2 Angels with the lands or 1 Angel with the lands? There's 3 total.
1 Angel. Oh, sorry. So Jace, Divining Top, and you can't cut him off of lands from that spot, I guess.
This is a really difficult decision. So many iterations that he can do here. If he leaves 8 power, he really would like to kill 2 of the Angels, is what I'm thinking here. He can maybe race 1 Angel. If he is the only 1 Angel, he can get a kill spell. He can maybe race it. I think of the 4 cards of the 2 Angels, or the 3 Angels and the Jace, he probably needs to split those guys 2 and 2. If he puts any 3 into one pile, Steve's going to keep that one.
The split that Steven's kind of working on right now is also what I was thinking about. I don't know if you can let him keep all the lands and the Jace and the Angel. You may just have to kind of even split. As tough as it is, with these Liliana splits, generally speaking, you want to put your opponent in the squeeze, and Steven Mann might be in a spot where he has to say, you get to keep roughly half your board, because he can't be too aggressive splitting off the resources, because Guillerm can just keep majority Angels or Jace and all the lands or whatever. So he may have to actually split fairly close to down the middle on all the resources.
Looks like he's trying to go as even as possible. Angel Jace versus Angel top is pretty even on those 5 cards. You see, it looks like he's going to go 2-3-3 on lands. He's trying to split them up in a way that no matter which pile Steve keeps, he has bad mana.
Yeah. So yeah, Stephen Mann eventually concludes kind of the same thing that I did working those splits out in my head is you can't cut them off of anything, so you just have to say, take away half your board approximately.
And I like the keep that Steve made. He kept Angel top. While Jace is better than top, 8 Power of Angels is really strong. And this seems like the right call by Steve.
Yeah. Getting to keep the Divining Top plus some mana is a really nice consolation prize as well.
We'll see. Steve had spun the top before. It looks like he's going to re-spin it now. Things have changed ever since he lost half his permanents. So he'll draw. It's going to be Flooded Strand. That's a good one here. And we'll decide 1 angel or 2 from Steve. With 2 angels, he has a 3-turn clock. But he does have to worry. Right now, Stephen Mann will put him to 9 on Steve's end step. And with a flipped Delver, could put him down to 7 and 4 on the ensuing attack.
I think he can only attack with 1 here, because he's not winning the game in 2 turns by attacking twice, attacking with both 2 turns in a row. So at that point, I think you're almost forced to play slightly more conservative here.
Remember, if Steve is just attacking with 1, he has Mann on a 5-turn clock, whereas Mann actually has Steve on a similar, has a similarly timed clock with Deathrite Shaman. This is one that can go really either way.
And a lot of it also depends on if Steve can find something in his top 3 off the Divining Top that influences the board. Because if he's able to pick up 1 piece of removal, then he can become much more aggressive attacking with the Angels. As the board currently stands, I think he needs to hold back 1 unless his game plan here is that Stephen Mann misses with this Delver flip. There's just a land on top, and maybe he can take a more aggressive approach.
Yeah, right now they're underway with the judge call. We don't have the specifics of it, but that's why there has been a pause in the game. While they figure this one out, we're going to bring it back to the booth here. Right now, we're in our last top 8 match between Stephen Mann and Steve Guillerm. They're on game 3 of a Sultai Delver versus Miracles matchup.
And this is a, I was discussing this earlier. The Sultai Delver deck can still play, even after some of the miracle tricks have happened. And we've seen them all in this game. Jace has come out. There's been a large entreat, bunch of spot removal, counter spells, removal spells. The Miracles player has gotten to do his thing, but Sultai Delver can still hang around because it's well suited to fight that sort of attrition battle.
Yeah, one of the things that I've noticed from watching this one is that the Miracles player can, the Miracles player here can only, he doesn't seem to be able to control the Sultai Delver player forever, and at some point, he really has to rely on entreat to win these games.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, we do have a little bit of an update. There was a judge call here. There had been multiple warnings for a slow play on Stephen Mann's side of the board. And I guess over the course of the tournament that if you get enough warnings from a judge, it does accumulate into a game loss. And that has been issued to Mann. So that game is going to go to Steve Guillerm, 2-1. And he'll advance to the top 4 where he's going to go ahead and play against Bob Huang.
And though these rounds are untimed in the elimination rounds, that does not excuse if a judge finds you to be guilty of slow play. Those are 2 separate things.
So now I have a question for you. You played in a lot of the higher level tournaments here. So what's the difference between slow play and playing slowly? Some people say, oh yeah,